Tina, the president there coming up with a new plan for dealing with those tricksy old debts.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Argentina, you might remember, defaulted on paying its debts back at the end of July after a US court ruling. It had missed a payment to bondholders who'd accepted a haircut on their debts in the wake of the country's financial crisis over 10 years ago. Now, that has led to a blockage in their system. President Cristina Fernandez has now offered to swap those bonds, which are governed by American law, for new bonds issued under Argentinian law. Now, that could allow the country to continue to make payments on those debts, getting it out of this situation that it's in. Now, those payments had been blocked by a US judge who'd ruled in favour of a group of holdout investors, those who'd refused the restructuring in 2005 and in 2010. Now, that judge said that Buenos Aires had to pay those investors up to $1.5 billion before paying the rest of its debt, something so far President Fernandez has refused to do. This proposal from her government won't solve that dispute, but it could allow those other bondholders to continue to get their money in the meantime.
OK, let's move on to a look at the markets and some big news for Apple.
Yes, shares in Apple hit a record closing price on Wall Street on Tuesday. It closed at $100.53, some 30 cents higher than the last closing peak in September 2012. Now, it's a vote of confidence for Chief Executive Tim Cook ahead of new product launches expected by Apple next month, expected to include the iPhone 6 as well as some wearable devices. Well, let's have a look at how things finished on the rest of the US markets. Good figures from the housing sector generally boosting investor confidence, as well as positive results from retailers Home Depot and TJ Maxx. The S&P 500 nudged closer to another record high, closing just shy of that, up 0.5%. A more mixed picture in trading over in Asia today, though. Telecom shares among the fallers in Hong Kong, and in Japan, the market suggesting the news that its trade deficit shrunk 6.6% year on year in July. That's due to a rise in exports.
All right, let's move on from share prices to the oil price.
And we're used to talking about oil prices moving when there's tensions in various parts of the world, but the recent violence in Iraq hasn't caused the usual movement on those markets. Crude oil prices have actually remained quite stable, which is good news for consumers. Delano D'Souza explains why.
Reasonable gas prices despite rising global tensions. Over the past 3 months, the price of NYMEX crude has remained relatively stable, and it's now currently well below the $100 mark.
We have a supply of oil that's greater than the demand. Why? Because there's less and less demand for oil because there's less growth in the world. So finally, it's this difference between the supply and demand that seems to absorb all the geopolitical tensions which we see in Iraq. And that's why the price per barrel hasn't spiked.
The increase in supply is also due to the United States reducing its dependence on oil-producing Gulf states through fracking.
They import less oil, so when they do this, the markets are relatively confident.
Yet, in spite of stable oil prices, not all consumers are happy with the price they have to pay.
Apparently it's gone down a little bit, but it's still expensive. I think it's always expensive.
I guess if you look at what's going on in the world, you can see that it could be a lot higher.
For now in Iraq, the key oil-producing sites are not located near the conflict zone, a fact that so far kept the oil markets calm.
A quick look now at some of the day's companies' news. And more than 2,400 former bankers at Lehman Brothers have won a legal battle to have their pensions paid in full. The former staff members, all based in Britain, will receive a total of $306 million from the collapsed bank. The deal was negotiated by the UK's pensions regulator. Standard Chartered has been banned from processing risky dollar transactions for certain clients of its Hong Kong branch. It's part of a $300 million settlement with New York regulators we were reporting on yesterday. The bank's been sanctioned for not fixing problems with its anti-money laundering procedures, as required by a ruling 2 years ago. And a former advisor to Barack Obama's election campaign has joined the private car hire service Uber. David Plouffe will become head of policy and strategy at the company next month. He'll be leading the regulatory battles Uber is facing in cities from Washington to Paris.
Now, we were talking a little bit earlier, weren't we, about things that can move the market, some pretty strange things sometimes. Stephen is about to explain to us why he thinks that Justin Bieber has had an impact.
Yeah, this is pretty concrete, I think. The cosmetics company Elizabeth Arden saw its shares fall by more than 23% in Wall Street on Tuesday, and apparently Justin Bieber and Taylor Swift are to blame. its sales at the company were hit by a fall in demand for celebrity fragrances, and in particular those belonging to those two singers. Now, Elizabeth Arden saw its quarterly sales plummet by almost a third in general, and the company warned it wasn't expecting things to pick up for the next 6 months. I'm sure you can't blame everything on celebrities, but it seems like a reasonably good scapegoat.
OK, you got some pretty concrete figures there. I'll let you off. Thanks very much. Stephen Carroll with a look through the business news there. Right, it's time for today's special focus report.